All right, we're recording. If you're watching this, you have likely had a headache in your life. And that's what Dr. V and I are here to get rid of, not just the headaches in your head, but the headaches in your life when it comes to your health. As we were just discussing, you could swing. You don't hit yourself in the head, you're going to hit somebody in the head who had a headache. And what we're going to talk about today, most specifically, is that your instincts are to run and grab Tylenol, Advil, some type of anti-inflammatory drug. But there are a lot of dangers in that. We're going to go through what those dangers are, and we're going to answer all of the most commonly asked questions about headaches. But what most is important, and that's what I'm sitting here with Dr. V, the headache expert. This guy wrote the book on headaches, literally, and it's called The Headache Advantage. And the reason that he calls it that is because you're getting information from your brain, very specific information about something that's going on in your body. So let's talk headaches, Dr. V. First of all, thanks, of course, for writing the book and being the expert and figuring all this stuff out for us, so we don't have to. But
Thank you. We
now,
don't want to create headaches.
right, there are 7 kinds of headaches, right, that you talk about. But the number one most asked question is what causes headaches, and that's a big question. We can't answer that in 30 minutes, right? Because there's just
Right.
go on. But let's talk for just a second about what you see as the most common headache, the one that happens the most, that's number one in there. And
Mhm.
what are some of the things that have happened to our society in the last, 15, 20 years that have contributed to us having that kind of headache more than any other?
Right. Let's start by backing up a little bit and talk about how we can take advantage of the headache, right? I'm a B positive blood type. We've got to be optimistic about this. So the reality is headaches are telling a story. That's why they're so hard for traditional medicine or traditional doctors to figure out, because most of the time, always, they are referred pain from somewhere else in the body. And so trying to block the pain, trying to block it, trying to figure out, oh, is it a tumor? Is it, this or that? It's usually because it's a referred pain from the gallbladder, from the thyroid, from the pituitary, from the colon, from the hormones. So we want to look at it from I said colon. So we want to look at what those triggers are. And that's where, kinesiology, applied kinesiology really gives us the tools to figure it out and figure out what is referring pain to the head. And the reason I called the book The Headache Advantage is because clinically for me, the location of head pain, a person can have 15, 20 different symptoms and problems, seemingly unrelated all over the body, but the location of the head pain, the advantage of that is that tells me what the priority is in that person's life to make change, to figure out, hey, I need to clean up the gallbladder. I need to get my gut biota, get my gut bacteria working properly. I need to de-stress my thyroid or feed my thyroid so it'll function better. And so that's the advantage of what this head pain is trying to tell us, is it's giving us a holy grail of like, this is where we need to target our energy to get the best return on our health investment. So that's massive, and that's what unfortunately so many people are missing when they try to elaborate or try to understand what this head pain is.
For longevity, it's giving you information that something isn't right in the rest of your body. It's not just in your head. And I think that's what people think. All headaches are just something that's wrong up in your brain, right? But it's actually
Right.
coming from the rest of your body. And since I've known you or gone into your lectures and learned about this, the first question I always ask people as soon as they say, well, I ask them, do you get headaches? Next question is, where in your head do you experience the headaches? Because and
Yes.
they always have to think about it, And so if you're
Right.
watching, first thing, pay attention to, even if you're still going and grabbing NSAIDs, just remember, where did I feel the pain in my head? Pay attention to that. And I think it's also important to pay attention to what time of day you're experiencing the headache, right?
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
Clearly. And, of course, paying attention to the things you've eaten recently. But
Right. From the longevity perspective, the
yeah,
headache is like the proverbial crystal ball.
really, yeah, there,
It's
you
a
know
crystal
what?
ball on our head. Say, hey, we make this change, that's going to change the outcome of our lives, Don't make the change, we're going down, going left towards a, ugly road, And part of what we're going to discuss today is, when is it a medical emergency? When do we need to make that 911 call, with pain in the head? We're going to talk about that a little bit. But again, most of the time that is saying, hey, if we continue down this road, it's sin, if you will. We're heading down a road that's going to compromise our health in as a whole. if we recognize what the triggers are, use the book, the seven triggers, figure out what those are or what the trigger is, then we can go down a much better, much healthier journey and just enjoy those years, pending years as we go along.
Yeah. Well, let's talk real quick, just because I know I want people to know that a lot of times the instinct is that they just want the pain to go away. They want to just grab that NSAID. So let's talk a little bit about the dangers of those NSAIDs.
Right, right, right.
Let me just show you this article that I found. And this is the British Journal of General Practice
Okay.
brought this to us. So because it's a 800 million pounds annually is what's costing people.
Wow.
Preventable adverse drug reactions responsible for 10% of hospital admissions. That's crazy.
Conservative. That sounds conservative.
Well, this is just in the UK. Think about it. So
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
information over in that tiny little island over there. That's responsible for 30% of hospital admissions, mainly due to bleeding, heart attack, stroke, kidney damage. So this isn't something that is super safe and easy for people. And as you and I
There's
were talking,
consequence.
yeah, it says from the first day of use, from the first day, all NSAIDs increase the risk of GI bleeding, myocardial infarction, so heart attacks, and
From
stroke
day one. From day
from
one.
day one. Yes.
and
Uh,
and that has as a society continue on with that, but as a society, people that risk is, you can keep that up. There was a lot of good information there.
sure.
But I mean, as a society, people have been desensitized to that, thinking that taking an aspirin a day keeps the doctor away, keeps the risk of cardiovascular risk down, that has been debunked. And that is a fallacy. And we're looking at a part of why. I mean, okay, it may thin the blood, but look at the consequences. It's gonna going to compromise the sulfation and the methylation pathways in the liver that then lead to plaquing of the arteries. It's completely backwards of what most people have been led to believe, in the health arena.
Well, because it's been normalized, and that's part
Right.
of a lot of what you and I do is we spend so much time looking at things that a deviation like this that has been
hmm
normalized. And
hmm
say,
hmm
whoa, 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 whoa! Just because it's common doesn't
hmm
mean that is normal, right?
Right, right.
It's been made socially acceptable doesn't mean that it's not harming you, right?
Right, right.
Cigarettes are a great example. They were so totally socially acceptable and encouraged. And you have to be humble enough to look back and go, maybe not such a great idea. But yeah, these things actually contribute to heart disease, contribute to it.
Oops.
But people are still, I'm sure you still have people come into your clinic and say, well, my doctor told me to take an aspirin every day, baby aspirin, right?
Right, right.
Baby aspirin, still an NSAID, right? And it's still,
Right.
the research is not in support of that being a necessarily great idea. Now, we're not giving
Right.
medical advice. We're not telling people to go against your medical doctor. We're just saying
hmm
maybe keep asking more questions and see if the risks are truly outweighing the benefits, right?
Right, right. Yeah. So from a truth or trend perspective, we were sold that was truth, that was preventative medicine. How silly is that? But
Mm,
you and I are here to say that the trend is gone.
yes.
Let's end that trend and help people make better choices. If a person has been told to take NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, to prevent or keep the blood thin, to prevent heart attack, a simple solution like black currant seed oil, right? Is a great way to keep that blood thin. Vitamin E, nuts and seeds, organic nuts and seeds. I mean, seed oils get bad press. We've talked about that a bit, but that's typically the processing. If you eat organic, raw walnuts, for example, those are loaded with vitamin E. They're going to help keep that blood flowing smooth and flowing through the arteries. Keep your hydration up. The body's 70% water,
Yeah.
potentially. So the brain, as is the brain. In fat, I mean, the brain's mostly fat, but the concept is we need to keep the blood flowing and viscous so it can flow through those arteries. So, easy solutions there.
You just rerouted my brain because I usually think nutrition first, but for some reason, over the years, when I think of keeping the blood thin, I always think of things that start with G, like ginkgo and
Right.
garlic and
Okay.
Coca-Cola, and
Uh,
sure, there's another one out there that starts with a G, ginger, right?
right.
There's
Okay.
like herbs that are also known to help keep that good. So yeah, there's so many options, that you can look
Right.
to keep
Right. 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 And all those are good for the heart. So, right. And the brain, ultimately. Yeah. Beautiful. Good things to keep functioning well.
Okay,
Yeah.
So what other things have you seen be an issue with taking these Tylenols and ibuprofens and these things that people might have taking all the time? What are some of
Right. So great question. So off camera, we were talking about where I originally got into the whole leaky gut deep dive, if you will. I had a patient years ago that was awaiting a knee replacement, and so she had chronic knee pain on the left, on the outside of the knee, and I couldn't get it to resolve. I was doing a lot of liver detox and treating the small intestine and things, but she was taking Advil, like candy to mask her knee pain. And so the physical compromise is that it obliterates, if you will, the small intestine, which is where a lot of the absorption takes place. When the small intestine is compromised, then the quad muscles, the muscles of the knee, become weak. And so that she was perpetuating that cycle. She was creating the weakness in the knee that she was waiting surgery for, but by trying to mask the pain, she was perpetuating the problem. So there's a very well-known disruption or compromise of intestinal function with these anti-inflammatories. So that's part of the gig. The other part, we talked about, the cardiovascular risk and the liver compromise. Um, that also inhibits sulfation, which is where the stress hormones break down, right? So that cortisol, we don't need more cortisol in our lives. Most of us are stress junkies as it is, and overproducing cortisol. So,
you need to form a 12-step group for cortisol?
right. There'd be plenty of takers.
Yeah.
So we need that sulfation pathway to break down the cortisol, to break down serotonin, also the excitatory neurotransmitters also break down in that sulfation pathway. So that's when serotonin is high, that's OCD, obsessiveness, obsessive compulsive disease, right? And worrying about things.
You're saying now I'm going to latch onto that because I talk so much about mental health, right? And
Hmm.
balance
Hmm.
neurotransmitters in the brain. Somebody who is taking an NSAID, it actually increases serotonin, is what you're saying in the brain.
It inhibits the liver's ability to break down serotonin. So functionally, it would be high serotonin. Yes.
So it's almost like an NSAID, right? It almost like it slows down the serotonin
You,
from getting broken down.
you
So if
said
you're
NSAID. You mean
or
serotonin in serotonin
SSRI,
SSRI.
an
Right.
antidepressant
Right.
medication, most of the antidepressant medications are aimed at trying to slow down that process.
Breakdown of certain. Right. Right.
So this
Right.
could contribute to that, and so that could be a bad thing, right? You could be doing
Absolutely.
high levels of serotonin with an NSAID. So be careful if you're taking an antidepressant, especially and taking this, right?
Yeah, yes, yes, yeah. And you're gonna, with the serotonin being high, you're gonna obsess and worry about your pain more. Ultimately,
Right.
you get that's the rabbit hole of high serotonin. We get stuck in a rut and stuck in obsessing about things,
Wow.
whether it's
Think
pain
about
or
think about the parents out there who maybe have their child on an antidepressant, and then the kid has a headache because of the antidepressant, and they give them something that actually can be causing, serotonin syndrome, right? Something too high. That's
right. And part of that serotonin syndrome, part of that high serotonin is the pulsing aspect of a headache.
really the throbbing. You got to think
Hmm.
high serotonin. Okay, so what would be a solution for somebody who has that throbbing headache that's high
Ma-
serotonin? Things to help
Magnesium and
her.
B12, magnesium and B12 both help break down serotonin.
Yeah,
So as you mentioned, garlic is ginkgo, all those herbs you just mentioned.
yeah.
Most of those facilitate sulfation, the sulfation pathway to help break that down, get us back on track. So ginkgo would be brilliant, or garlic, either one of those would be brilliant to help uh, reduce or diminish that pulsatile type of a headache. Also, often there's a colon component to it as well. So we want to make sure that they're pooping properly, make sure they're having at least one good, productive, solid formed bowel movement a day. We're going to talk about that
Easier,
as we get into
easier
headaches.
said than done, Doc. I
Right,
have
right.
a whole like page of checklists to get people pooping, but you got to make it happen. You're right.
Right.
That has to be part of the equation for sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
Wow.
Right, right.
See, I didn't, I need to add that into my seminar. I don't talk about that NSAIDs could be something that could contribute to a serotonin syndrome, which is too high. And as we know, that's the dangerous one. That's,
Yeah.
big piece that's associated with the suicidal ideation, the homicidal
Right,
is too much
right, right.
schizophrenic high levels of these neurotransmitters. That's
And
powerfully important information for anybody out there with kids or anybody who knows anybody with depression and
right.
they're taking these over the counter NSAIDs.
Well, just to you know, shine a light on you a bit, you've got that great product with lithium in it. The Great Minds LI with lithium in it. Lithium is my favorite thing to help reduce high serotonin, especially when there's suicidal ideations. Lithium's my first go-to, and it tends to be the trigger there. It tends to be mercury, especially from old amalgam fillings that are poof, vaporizing mercury into the brain every time they eat. If a person, is old enough to have those old amalgam fillings. So that's another compromise, another good place where that Great Minds LI is going to be a very beneficial product.
Yeah, I think mercury toxicity is way more common than people realize, and that is really important to know that we got to be careful with that. But
Right, right. Let's I mean, we can talk on these all day. We had
yeah,
those since this is kind of the intro to headaches, we wanted to talk about when is a headache a medical emergency. So you had that list,
yeah,
you had that great list to go through.
yeah. Let's do this. It's one of the biggest questions that people ask is when should I be concerned about the headache? So we went to headache.org and we're going to share with you. We're going to go through some of these one by one to help people understand. So number one, it says your headache is accompanied by the following, any of the following. And if you have not discussed these symptoms with your doctor before, so when is it emerging? Number one, confusion is what it's saying. So we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a loaded
You
subject,
shouldn't,
right?
right?
Do you want to lay 'em, read them all and then we'll go one by one?
Sure, sure. Yeah,
There's a list
confusion,
there.
dizziness, fever, numbness, persistent vomiting, shortness of breath, slurred speech, stiff neck, unpredicted symptoms affecting your ears, nose, throat, or eyes, unrelenting diarrhea, vision loss, weakness, and then a few more if you have a headache that persists and continues to get worse or won't stop. Headaches interfere with your normal activities. You find yourself taking pain relievers for more than 2 days a week. That's you take over the counter
Cluster.
medications. Say that again.
That's cluster headache, right?
Right.
What people will call cluster. Carry on.
Coughing, sneezing, bending over, exercise, or sexual activity causes headaches.
Right.
You have headaches that continue and that begin after a head injury. So yeah, this is a very exhaustive list of why
Yeah.
you should take this more seriously. But what we're
Right.
saying is, all of this is information. So let's start at the top with confusion and dizziness.
Right. So, I mean, a lot of what they're trying to do, one basically, you look at a list like this, it's like any of this means a medical emergency, and that's how a lot of these websites are set up. That everything's a medical emergency. Call 911, get to your doctor right now, which it's business,
Sure.
it's
A little bit.
practice management, if you will.
Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Job security for those of us treating it, but
Mhm.
but the reality is, yes, as we've talked about, it is your head pain is your body telling a story, giving a sign. So a lot of these are the reason they're on that list. Can we do
Oh, you
maybe
want it back up then?
share the screen or something like that?
Great. Yep.
Um, a lot of those are there because of the risk that, hey, there's a tumor or there's a stroke that's there. Tumors are going to be more slow growing. The symptoms are going to grow over time. But the crazy reality is I've seen tumor and well, this is reality. I've seen it clinically, and we've got MRI confirmation that tumors have shrunk doing this headache protocol that's laid out in the Headache Advantage. We had a right-sided headache, right-sided head pain, that there was a known tumor there that shrank over time, treating the gallbladder, for example. So even those gnarly, considered medical emergencies, life or death situations have shown benefit treating this way. And so right-sided headache, we've got, confusion because that's acetylcholine, that's recall neurotransmitters. Persistent vomiting is the body trying to get rid of toxins and eliminate these things that are causing the headache or compromising the gallbladder, for example. Slurred speech also goes in with the acetylcholine and so on. Naturally, if there's a growth in the brain and we're having slurred speech, that's a problem. So I understand where they're going with these, but also to give a person peace of mind. These are all just like the headache. These are signs that they're telling us where the body needs help, right? Persistent vomiting. I had a dentist years ago that I was an intern literally, so I didn't have the confidence to help walk him through the situation, but he had pretty heavy metal toxicity. He had mercury overload. I mean, he was a dentist in the early days. This was 30 some odd years ago, and And every time we gave him parotid or gave him a supplement to help get the mercury out, he'd either have diarrhea or vomiting. He's like, it didn't work. I got sick. It's like, that's your body doing what it needs to do, right? It's the body trying to get those toxins out. It's just accelerating the release of them. You eat something that is, food poisoning, right? That
Right.
you puke or you get diarrhea because the body's trying to get it out before creates further damage in the system. So praise God for those mechanisms to help us and cleanse us ultimately.
Yeah. And that's just it. I think what you're saying is that, yeah, of course, take it seriously and be
Hmm. Hmm.
starting to take action, but also learn from it. I think is the biggest takeaway. What we're trying to say, right? Is that there
Right,
symptoms that your body's trying to help you with. And if you can take away the lesson from where it was, then you can do things to be more preventive in the future of it being a recurrence, right? Whereas taking
right,
an NSAID just blocks that, and then you're going to set yourself right up to keep coming back and keep coming back, right? And then you have to get stronger and stronger medications because your body's just
right.
volume saying, no, 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 I want to tell you something. And
Right,
so let me turn up the pain a little bit more until you get it, right? I mean, that's
right.
the takeaway.
Yeah,
All of it.
100%. And so a lot of those symptoms that are on that list are also laid out in the book with their individual headaches. So excuse me, like the neck stiffness is goes along with the thyroid headache. So there's a whole checklist in the beginning of the book there. When we talk about, say, for example, the tension headaches or the suboccipital headaches, then it talks about neck tension, it talks about low energy, it talks about weight gain, hair loss, other symptoms that would somebody that gives a person complete confidence that yes, this is a thyroid problem. And as you see, those are some of the warning signs that I
Yeah.
try to put together to help inspire people to take advantage of what their head pain is trying to tell them, so
Mm.
that they can realize that right-sided headaches is a early warning that acetylcholine
Let's go back
is
to that.
low.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because this is what we're talking about today. Maybe an early warning of heart attack. Let's talk about that a little bit more.
Right. So, I alluded to it as a smidge a minute ago, but acetylcholine is the brain's control of the gallbladder. Acetylcholine is a brain chemical that regulates how the gallbladder functions. When the gallbladder is compromised, then we burn up, we get low in acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a precursor to nitric oxide. So if we're low in nitric oxide, that can cause that constrictive, restrictive TIA, transient ischemic attack, if it's in the brain, or it can cause a heart attack. The good news is it is the constrictive type of a heart attack that they can reverse quickly. That's the type where a person takes nitro and snaps out of it and says, I'm fine, I can go back to my marathon, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that's where that becomes valuable and beneficial. The reason I say that's good news is that's easier to deal with, and it's a lot more prompt response than somebody that's got plaquing, which is high homocysteine and plaquing of literal plaquing of the arteries. That person symptomatically is never going to have blood pressure go down. The diastolic blood pressure is higher. The risk number there is going to be higher when we have plaquing of the artery. So that's a kind of an overt risk sign to help a person understand what the triggers are. My dad had some symptoms in the cardiovascular department years ago, and he had recurring nosebleeds. And so, typically if you start having stroke-like symptoms, they say take aspirin, Advil, that sort of thing. And I'm like,
But,
no, he's got bleeding problems, not clotting problems.
right.
So taking that, so first thing when I heard, on the phone that this stuff was starting to take place, I said, Dad, make sure that they don't try to give you NSAIDs to correct this problem because it's not that kind of a compromise. So that's how things can fit together, and it's how we can learn from what our body's trying to tell us.
And so these right-sided headaches, I don't want to alarm anybody, but it could be a sign
Yes,
of that. It just means that if you're getting it consistently on the right, we do need to take some action. We need to start doing things for the body. What are
yes.
the top things that somebody out there listening right now who has experienced a lot of right-sided headaches? What would the first things that they should do? What would the food first line therapy be for somebody with right
Right.
headaches?
Yeah, great. And so right side headaches are the most common of the 7 patterns of headaches. That's why many of the podcasts I've been on, if we've talked about this, one of them, the so-called migraine expert, still had right-sided headaches. And
Wow.
she's got a podcast specifically related to these. And anyway, she was coming from a different perspective, and I wanted to do that. She talks a lot about the medications and things there. Great, brilliant mind. um, but missing the gallbladder component. So there's a reason, especially we in America deal with these so much, is because glyphosate, the pesticide from the toxin in Roundup, is the most common trigger there.
Right.
So the two most common triggers and the other thing that's hot on the podcast circuits right now is the imbalance between omega 3s and omega 6s. In other words, all the seed oil compromises. I alluded to using walnuts, potentially to help thin the blood earlier. That is a seed oil, but that's a walnut as it's found in nature. That's not oil
Right.
extracted from it. It's not heated, it's not cooking with the seed oil. It's not frying your French fries in a seed oil that's dramatically damaging and setting a person up for trans fat problems, cancers and things down the road.
Let's go back to the glyphosate real quick, right? I just want to
Yep.
hit this hard because I don't think people realize how much they're being exposed to glyphosate. This is
Hmm.
from moms across America. 81% of Americans have had recent exposure to glyphosate. I actually had
Wow.
a lady who was eating Cheerios every day as a snack, right? And Cheerios are probably one of the top most saturated things with glyphosate. We need to help people stay away from that. Roundup, as you said, is the most widely used herbicide in the world. Uh,
Right.
Bayer is supposed to stop selling Roundup in 2023, citing risks for farm workers and consumers. And
Hmm.
once they found glyphosate more than 95% of oat-based food samples. So here's the top ones to avoid where glyphosate hides on your plate: high fructose GMO corn syrup. So there's so many things that people are eating, right? They have no
Uh,
idea that that's
yet another reason not to eat high fructose corn
right.
syrup, as if we needed more.
Right? Potatoes desiccated with herbicides, right? So what do
Oof.
you think? Most restaurants, most fast food restaurants, you think they're using organic potatoes? No, that's another
Mhm.
reason. Be careful with your French fries, right?
Right,
Big one.
right.
Another high fructose GMO corn syrup, cows fed GMO corn and soy. So that's another one. You could have gotten
Most of them.
uh, beef that wasn't organic.
Right.
Wheat that has been, so wheat, what does that mean? Every bread, biscuit, everything, right? That's out there. That's
Right.
organic.
So they use glyphosate, they use Roundup to kill the wheat so that they can harvest it all at the same time. It's business. I get it. It's business. But
Yeah,
they're
sure.
basically spraying the Roundup on the wheat right before they harvest it. So it's profoundly it's there. I mean, in the early days before I understood this, I kept seeing wheat compromise the gallbladder, and the stomach. And I thought, oh, it's binding up hydrochloric acid, till I realized that it was the glyphosate that literally inhibits the production of bile, so then we don't digest fats well. And not only that, it also obliterates the intestinal lining. So if you have a right-sided headache and a whole headband type of headache, you definitely have glyphosate poisoning, if you will. Thanks for
And
that list. That was great.
yeah, before I don't want to hit this to death, but people need to know, right? It's like, these are things that they're commonly exposing themselves to, and that's why it's the most common headache is the right side. But the three
Yeah.
contenders, Honey Nut Cheerios, can you believe that? 883 parts per billion. And then Nature Valley. I mean, I grew up as a kid thinking this was healthy. You'd reach for the Valley bar.
Yeah.
Crunchy granola with the maple syrup is number two, and their Nature Valley granola cups is number three. So here's a whole list. If you guys want more information about this, you can shop the Clean 15, but go to Moms Across America. They do a really good job of breaking down your exposures to glyphosates on there.
So the top foods is wheat, corn, soy, and oats. You talked, oats are prominent, and most of us are, and oats are supposed to be the food to lower cholesterol, right?
Yeah,
Prevent heart attack.
right.
Yeah, they're eating oats with Roundup and glyphosate on it. So wheat, corn, soy, and oats. So any of those foods, for sure, make sure they are organic because they're virtually guaranteed to have glyphosate on them. If I'm obsessive about this stuff, and I still have glyphosate show up in my body periodically
I know.
because it's so prolific in our environment. And I mean, along this line, many people say, well, "How come I can go to Europe and eat and eat the breads, right? And enjoy, in Italy and the European Union." And the reality is, back in the 90s, I've told this story before, but back in the 90s, the researcher that was originally paid to document that there was no medical side effects from glyphosate, started saying, well, yes there is. So he was gagged and wasn't able to talk about it. That gag order came up at the end of in the late 90s, and so the press was on his lawn, that the day that the gag order was up, said, okay, now tell us what the side effects are, tell us. And so it went out in the media saying, glyphosate obliterates the intestinal lining, it compromises bile production, it does all these things. And so within 10 months, all those major manufacturers that you just had up on the screen um, pulled those products from them. So in other words, they had to, because people voted with their dollars. People would not buy those products anymore. So we as a nation need to do that same thing here, where manufacturers will stop spraying their crops with it if we're not buying their products, right? So make a
Yeah, it's
difference.
hard for people to hear because it does make things a little more difficult. But I have to repeat this to people many times. I had this conversation with a gentleman just last week who he was telling me about all the strawberries he was eating. I'm like, they're number one on the dirty dozen list. So your options are you have to eat them organic or you can't eat them. And he just looked at
Right.
me. Those are my only. Yes, those are your only options. Either you eat it or it's organic. Let me say that again. If you don't want these right-sided headaches and all these downstream problems, unfortunately, those are your choices at this point. Either you
Right.
eat those foods or you eat them. They have to be organic, right? Still, that's
Right.
and organic
One
is
of
a whole rabbit hole to go down, right? People go, well, can you trust organic? And I get it. I understand that.
right, right. Well,
Yeah,
one of Dr. V's favorite quotes, organic is cheaper than chemo.
absolutely. Or all of these things, right? Or just one stay in a hospital, right? And yeah, okay. So
Cost you an extra buck for those strawberries, but it's a whole lot better than chemo and all the other, stuff that be again, we're saying that because there's toxic metals in there. If they're not organic, we're talking about glyphosate, that's part of the problem, but there's toxic metals in there. And almost always, if you pull back the veil far enough, the toxic metals are the most common trigger for cancers. The disruption of the way of physiology that causes cells to mutate. So again, organic is cheaper than chemo. And a right-sided headache could be your early warning sign that you're heading down that road, right? Just to circle back to where we started. So
mhm.
easy to rabbit trail with us, huh?
Well, it's important, and that's why they still need people. Even the book is a great guide, and it can walk you through it. But they still would obviously benefit from working with someone like you who can like pinpoint the very, which one is it? What is the thing that's causing this? But I think if we're going beyond the most commonly exposed things, I think you're absolutely right for people to be aware of their glyphosate. Just think
Mhm.
back this week. Did you eat any of those things that we just went over when you had a right-sided headache? Then
Right.
you have an idea. So, is there a way to help them clear this excess glyphosate once they've ingested it? Is there something you would help to suggest to them to get rid of it?
Great question. Yeah, so it's nutrients like folic acid, folate,
Like,
B12, B6. Those are nutrients that help drive methylation, will help regenerate, if you will, help rebuild the bile storage, the bile production that we need. With that, then we need to eat the omega-3s, the good fats, which is fish, avocado, potentially omega-3 oils to contract that gallbladder to get the bile moving. That's going to help accelerate the moving out of the glyphosate and toxins there as well.
so, what are some good sources of folate for people? Asparagus is one of my favorites. Beans are one of my
Hmm.
absolute favorites, right? And
Yeah,
I always
yeah.
want to remind people that if you're looking at the blue zones where people live the longest and that have the lowest rates of cancer and all of these diseases, they're eating lots of dietary folate in the form of beans, especially. That's a foundation of theirs. So
Hmm.
just for like a small portion of beans every day, I think is one of the smartest things you could do when it comes to
Yeah.
this.
Unfortunately, a lot of it was that list we shared last week with the what was it, the dirty dozen, right? Kale, spinach,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
those foods that we're pursuing as, oh, you're a health nut, you're eating kale. You know,
Right.
make sure it's organic again. Mhm.
Right. Right. Okay. What else? What else for a right-sided headache would be driving that headache? Because I'm always reminded that we surgically remove, right, in this country like 12 to 15,000 gallbladders every week. So there's a lot
Right,
of
right.
weight in the gallbladders in this country. They're not being nourished, they're not being fed. So obviously glyphosate's a driver of that, but what are some other things that are driving that?
Yeah, well, so imbalance of oils, the seed oils, right? So it goes back to that again. There's another, popular searched term right now. But the seed oils, a lot of the reason seed oils are getting a bad rap is because most of the time those are chemically modified. They're heated. It's the heating that. So a cis fat is boat shaped, where the fat kind of goes up. That's a good fat, right? And that's metabolized. But when they heat it, then it bends, and it's basically a boat it's sinking, if you will. So that's
Okay.
glitched, and so that's a trans fat. And so the heat damages that carbon bond, and then the body doesn't recognize it to metabolize it and break it down. And so those trans fats, I was going to quote, I've always heard 120 takes 120 days for those to metabolize because they bind up where the good fats should be.
And the residue still remains even after that. Yeah.
Right. So we didn't put that 120-day mark in the book because, there wasn't good substantiated research saying, yes, this is the deal. But suffice it to say, it takes almost 6 months for those French fries you ate yesterday to be metabolized and get out of the system. So we need to, rather than eating those French fries, rather than eating those trans fats, those packaged, processed, boxed foods, then we want to eat the good, eat the fish, eat the good oils, even olive oil, good extra virgin olive oil, those things that are going to help bind up where we should. Again, those are building blocks for hormones, right?
Yeah.
So we need that too. So if cholesterol's high, that's a sign, right? That's a fairly well-known thing that taking omega-3s helps lower cholesterol. That's part of the mechanism there, right? Cholesterol is the building blocks for hormones. If we're deficient in hormones or if we're deficient in good fats, then the liver is going to overproduce cholesterol to compensate as a compensatory mechanism. It's not the devil of plaquing of the arteries that was one of the other podcasts we did. So balance. We get too many of the seed oils, though, too many omega sixes, like the nuts and seeds, if we're vegetarian living on nuts and seeds all day long, that's going to congest the gallbladder and set up potentially a right-sided headache. So a solution there would be take an omega-3, get the fish oils, eat more fish, to contract the gallbladder, keep it mobile, keep it functioning. Because again, that contraction of the gallbladder is part of the detox process. It helps us digest fats, but it's also getting rid of toxins that the liver has taken out of the blood and put into the gallbladder for release. So keep it contracting with good omega-3s, balancing between the nuts and seeds and the fishes to keep the gallbladder functioning well to reduce the potential for right-side headaches.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, and other foods that would be good for the gallbladder, liver, gallbladder overall. I mean, because I don't know how much time we have, but yeah, there's more we can get into this, obviously.
Beets, right?
Yeah,
We can't talk about the gallbladder without mentioning beets,
deep
right?
greens, greens of the beets as well,
Beet
right?
greens, yeah, but the betaine in there helps make bile, right? And it helps thin the bile to flow so that bile is flowing properly, right? If that bile is thick and congested, that's where the stones form. That's where, people end up having their gallbladder removed. I mean, I remember back when I was in school, they said, fat, fertile, and female was, and 40 was the
Right.
four F's of gallbladder. But now it's like human gallbladder problem. That means you have gallbladder problems.
That's true. That is true. But let's also think about high estrogen, high estrogen, high estrogen, high estrogen, all of those,
Right.
which is also an aggravator of the gallbladder, which we'll have to get into in a further future,
Yeah,
which is
when we
the
talk
bitemporal,
bitemporal headaches, yeah, like my
right?
headphones here, that's about would be example. Yeah.
So okay. Any last thoughts? Because I don't want to ramble on forever. I just want those people who are watching right now to know that Dr. V and I are going to go through every type of headache. The next 7, every other week, we're going to hit on the 7 types of headaches. So if you have questions or comments, leave them now, and we will definitely be addressing those in those future podcast episodes in the next few months as we go through these, because there's a lot to unpack here. But I think
Right.
the greatest takeaway is just, even if you do reach for something to get rid of that pain right away, remember where it was and use that information to know that your body needs some help getting rid of things. And if it's that glyphosate, I'm sure it is. I even had, because I went to some graduation parties this weekend, and I grazed a little bit, I sampled a
Mm.
couple of wares, and I got a headache. And I
Mm.
just enough for my body to say, "Hey, dummy, don't eat that stuff. You know better." You know.
Right, right.
But I was like, man, why am I getting a headache? And I was like, oh, shoot, of course. I ate things that I don't ever eat. Clearly, there's
Mhm.
in there that are aggravating me. So pay attention to that information and get rid
Right.
of it, right? Get your methylation going or whatever you need to do.
Great
Any other
summary.
thoughts?
Mm.
Yeah, for anybody?
Yeah, I mean that is the key. That is my platform is learn from what your head is trying to tell you. Learn from what your pain in general is trying to tell you. But the headache is the biggest sounding board, the biggest alarm to prompt us for change, right? Hmm.
And I'm not judging anybody or saying, wagging my finger at anybody for using NSAIDs. I get it,
Hmm.
right? When you're in
Hmm.
the middle of that pain, you want it to end. Totally understand that. But don't lose the lesson, right? I guess
Yeah,
I'm trying to say
right.
that. Still go back and nourish your body back to health so that it doesn't happen the next time and the next time and the next time. And then you know, have to fall into the category of the British statistic of headache problems from those. So,
Right.
right. Cool. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Dr. V, is that all you want to say today on this?
We'll
I mean,
see you next week for more
yeah,
headache. Well, next week we're going to talk emotions, so look forward to that one.
that's
That's going to
right.
be good. We got a great guest star coming with us
Right.
next week, but stay tuned. We're going to be going through each of these headaches. So if you or somebody you know that suffers from headaches, watch and first step, make
First
sure
of
they
all, get the
notice
book.
the location.
We're gonna make it.
There
We're
we
not
go.
sponsored by anybody, but we're gonna plug Dr. V's book because this is gold. This is a roadmap to what you say, a crystal ball for
The
longevity,
crystal ball.
right?
There we go.
I love it. Check out the book, and thanks for watching. And we'll be here to answer all your questions in the future. Have a good one, everyone.